James chapter 1. We were already in this book here a few weeks back when it talked about don't deceive yourselves, but don't be hearers of the word and not doers, but he's challenging them. He does a second, do not be deceived. And that is further down in James chapter 1. So if you join me there in James chapter 1, I was reading a real story about an individual that maybe some of you were familiar with this guy. Back in the 80s or so, he was a very, very popular TV meteorologist in the New York region. Sometimes they had him on the Today Show. His name was Dr. Bob Harris. And one of the things that made his type of presentation of the weather somewhat entertaining is on Fridays, he was an accomplished musician. He would sing the forecast. Now, I don't know how that went. I can't mimic it. I don't have any other details. But they called him Singing Bob Harris, who would give the weather forecast in ditties that he would write. And so he did that for a number of years and became one of the more popular forecasters in the New York City region in one of their local type of TV stations. But then all of a sudden somebody, at the height of his career, somebody sent an anonymous letter to the TV station, said you should double check his credentials. He claimed to have 3 degrees from 3 different universities. And when they examined it and found out he had no degree, even though he had seen and been in and registered in 3 universities, he never went to any. He was totally self-taught, and he did a decent job with the meteorology as far as the forecast, but his claims to being Dr. Bob, it was all bogus. So you can imagine what a TV station would do. Somebody made false claims on their application and their credentials. What would you think they would do? They would fire him. Okay, you would think that would be the normal case. Well, this TV station did fire him. But he argued with them, and he continued to go public. I'm still popular. It doesn't make any difference if I've not degreed, if I lied about it. As long as I'm telling you the right forecast, who cares? And so he continued to promote himself and propagate his idea and try to get several different types of jobs, and totally ignored the idea that he had deceived people and that he was totally qualified, even though he was, and they found out he was taking other people's forecasts and giving it for his forecast. And so there was a lot of this confusion that was going on. He's one of those individuals that you and I would say kind of self-deceived, kind of overlooking what he had done in lying about what he was and presenting himself as something that he wasn't. It wasn't what he was presenting. That's exactly what James is writing about in this portion of the book. There are people who are believers. They have a Jewish background. So he's writing, this is the brother of Jesus, one of the first epistles written, if not the first in the New Testament. And he's writing to Jewish believers that are scattered all over, according to chapter 1, verse 1, 2, 3, 4. And so he's writing to them. And as he's writing to them, he's recognizing that, there's some people in this church body that he's writing to, that's where there's Jewish assemblies that are going on. And some of those people are deceiving themselves. They are presenting themselves as being saved, but their credentials aren't really there. Look at chapter 2. Chapter 2, where he makes this comment that you're very familiar with, where he says, what does it profit, my brethren, though a man say he has faith and he has not works? Can faith alone save him? You and I immediately say, does it take works to get us saved? No. Does faith alone save us? Yes. But what's James talking about? James is talking about the idea that if you say you have faith and you have no works, your faith is dead. He goes on, he says, if a brother or sister be naked and destitute, and one of you say, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, notwithstanding you have, or you give them not those things which they're needful to their body, what does this profit? He says, even so faith, if it has not works, if it doesn't have fruit, if it doesn't bear truth, he says, what good is this? What does it profit? Because if it has not works, it's dead, being alone. Yea, a man may say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that there is one God. You do well, but the devil also believes and trembles. Don't you know this, O vain man, that faith without works is is dead. Now, he's not the only one that writes about this. Jesus warned about this. Jesus warned that come at the judgment time, that there's going to be people who say, Lord, Lord, have not we done all these wonderful things? But he will say, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, I never. Okay, there's going to be people who are saying they're saved, but they really aren't. And so we read about that in that epistle. Titus writes about where he says they profess that they know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient unto every good work. They're reprobate. So there's lots of times people will make profession, but they have no possession of Christ. And he says, okay, so don't be deceived. Don't let somebody deceive you. Don't you be deceived. If, he says, somebody claims, I know him, and he keeps not his commandment, has no desire to obey God, he's a liar. Truth's not in him. And yet that happens. Some people are self-deceived. But he doesn't stop there. James says that's not only sometimes people are deceiving themselves about their salvation, sometimes they deceive themselves about being a godly person. He says this group is gathering at church services. They're coming and they're saying that they're spiritual. But he challenges them where he says unto them repeatedly such things as, from whence comes the wars and fightings among you? They come from your own lusts that were warring in your members. In other words, why are you folk having such disunity in the body, but you claim to be spiritual? That's an impossibility. He goes on, he says, some of you are adulterers and adulteresses, knowing not that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God. So you can't be saying I'm spiritual, but then you're cozying up to the world. And he challenges them that they can't go together. In fact, he goes a little bit further. He says, some of you who are rich. And remember, back in that culture, most of the Jews had the initial thinking that if we're rich, we're blessed of God. Therefore, riches equals spirituality. Jesus had combated that. Jesus had taught against that. But some of these believers were carrying some of that with them into the new church that was being established. And he says, come on now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are going to come upon you. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have condemned and you have murdered righteous people. And the passage goes on, you're employing people, but you're not paying them. You're not treating them right. You're not being ethical in your business. You can't be godly and then be unethical. You can't be godly and then be worldly. You can't be godly and then have animosity between you. And so he's challenging them. But he's done it earlier in the book. Almost in that first chapter, he's started laying out the scene. Some of you are pretending to be spiritual, but you're not. Look at what he says in chapter 1, towards the very end of the chapter, where he says in verse 26, if any man among you seem to be religious. What's he mean by that phrase? What's he talking about? Let's break it down. In the original language, it's a first-class conditional phrase. That means this isn't hypothetical. He is basically saying, since some of you, since within your midst, there's somebody doing this. It's happening. That they are appearing to be righteous, or appearing to be godly, but they really aren't. They're making a pretense, and that pretense is that where he says, in these words, he says, since some among you seem to be religious. That word that he's using there is the idea that seem to be religious is one of two things. Either the other people are looking and saying that person's really spiritual and really, really an outstanding believer, or the other possibility is this person is thinking of themselves that they are really an outstanding believer. That seems to be going more with the word that is used when he uses the word dekai, the idea of self-examination or self-consideration, self-propagation, where he says, seems some of you are presenting yourself this way. You're assuming that you are spiritual. And he goes to the heart of the matter where he says that you appear to be religious. This word only shows up a handful of times in the entire New Testament. Every other time this word shows up, it's in a negative context. That it's the idea that these people, they appear to be religious, and yet there's a negative to it. They appear, but they're really not. And all the other times is dealing with paganism, things of that sort. But in this verse, it's in the context of the church and presenting themselves as if I'm a godly person and I love the Lord. But he says they really don't. They really don't. He goes on, he says that they seem to be religious. The word has the idea, if you look here, of being very meticulous in performing religious obligations and duties. It is the idea of you are crossing the T's and dotting the I's perfectly with what you consider to be religious duty or religious requirements. It is that idea of scrupulously, just absolutely zealously observing every rule and regulation. Now, this fits perfect with a group of former Jews, because did they grow up in the Jewish religion thinking they have to keep all these different rules and regulations? Sure. They get saved in Christ, but some of them are still carrying that concept that as long as I do certain duties, as long as I do certain practices, that automatically makes me spiritual. And he is saying, wait a minute, it's not what you do outwardly that makes you spiritual, it's what you are inwardly and walking with the Lord. Now, does that impact our outward? Yes, it does, because the way you're going to act outwardly is based upon what's inside. But understand where he's coming from. These people aren't worried about attitude. They aren't worried about association, affiliation with Christ. They, as believers, are saying, I'm spiritual because I'm doing certain duties outwardly. I keep certain practices that are promoted within this body. I'm doing them, therefore I'm spiritual. In our community, we have this. We have this in our region. We have this, we could have this in our own church body. That there are people that say, I am a spiritual Christian just because, and they have a list of do's and don'ts. And as long as I don't do this or I do this, that makes me spiritual. You know, we could look out and say, okay, like what kind of things does this happen to Bible-believing churches? It could be some people say, I'm spiritual because I don't drink, I so don't smoke, I don't do drugs. Therefore, that makes me really, really, really godly. Now, is there a reality here that says godly people stay away from that? That's a reality. But just because we stay away from it, does that make us godly? Could there be some people who are moral, but they're still not right with the Lord? Okay, so the idea, I don't curse, I don't cuss, I don't commit adultery, therefore I'm a very spiritual person. Or some would say this, I only wear certain colors of clothing. I only have certain style of clothing, and because I do that and I follow the regulations for clothing, therefore I'm spiritual. In other words, because I have a tie, I'm spiritual. That means a whole bunch of you just went like this to your collar, okay? If I operate by that factor, what am I saying about others? Okay, if they don't have the tie, they're not spiritual. Do churches do such regulations? Yes, they do. Okay, here's one. My hair is the proper cut or length. As long as I have the right hairstyle, as long as I have a tuft, I'm godly. Well, some of you are jealous of the tuft even, but other. Okay, but can we make these rules and regulations? We could. And people fall into that line that basically if they do these things, that makes me godly. I have the right color of vehicle. Have we ever seen this in our community? Okay, there's folk that have that. I attend church. I come Sunday school, I come Sunday morning, I come Sunday night, and I'll get to the Bible studies on Wednesdays. Therefore, I am automatically spiritual. Now again, our attending services, are they beneficial in our walk with the Lord? The answer is yes. They should be. But does that automatically make me spiritual just because I attend? No, because the reality is you can attend, you can walk through the door, but you get nothing out of the service. You could be in the building, but your heart and your mind is totally elsewhere. What about this? I'm very conservative politically, okay? And I separate from all that goofy stuff that's going on in the progressive mindset, therefore I'm spiritual. Does that make us spiritual because we are conservative in our social and political views? No, it does make us spiritual. There's lots of people who can be conservative. That doesn't mean that they're walking right with the Lord. And so he's challenging this, and it's a problem back in those days, and I think it's a problem in 2024, that people like us in our type of churches, that we can very quickly fall into this concept that as long as I do certain things, that makes me spiritual. And I don't have to worry about my relationship with the Lord as long as I'm just doing the things. We got to be careful because he says these persons are deceiving their own heart. The word that he uses here is different than the word he used earlier when he says they deceive themselves that they are hearers and they're not doers of the word. It's a totally different word. That word that he used before is the idea of you've gotten out of orbit. This word that he uses is you are going totally outside of reality. Now, we know what it means to go outside of reality. We have people in our culture who go outside of the reality of science and they say, I'm not a man, I'm a woman. And you and I go, that's goofy. That's goofy that you aren't, or people that say, I'm an animal and I'm a cat, okay? And all these, and we go, you're not thinking realistically. He uses that word when he's talking about people who are Bible believers sitting in Bible believing churches like this one, and they are saying, I'm spiritual, but they're not. He says, you don't connect with reality. You are deceiving yourselves. And so he's telling us it's possible for people like us to deceive ourselves this way, to also disconnect from the reality that we have our wrong estimate of our own heart. We evaluate ourselves and we're self-deluded by our own standards that we set up for ourselves and maybe for others, just because we follow religious duties. And he says this man's religion is vain. The word he uses here is, again, a uniquely used word. Most of the time we get the word vain, it shows up like we talked about it here a couple weeks ago, in 1 Corinthians 15, where he says, if you deny that Jesus is resurrected, your faith is in vain. If Jesus didn't resurrect, our preaching is in vain. It's a totally different word. That word, if I put up, I did. It's kene. It means your preaching is just wind. It's just air. It's meaningless. But the word he uses here has a different emphasis. He says your religion is vain. In other words, it's impotent. It is useless in helping you to reach your goal. Your goal is to be spiritual. That's what you're claiming. That's what you're striving for. I'm going to keep these rules so that I can become spiritual. He says, if this is the way you're thinking, your whole religious system, your whole practice, you're connecting all these duties and putting them in your life, it is basically going to never get you to your goal. You will never really be spiritual. In other words, what he's telling them, that whatever this man thinks his religious practices are doing for them, do you want to finish it? They aren't. They aren't accomplishing anything for him. He is just spinning his wheels, trying to present himself or think of himself as being very godly, and in reality, he's not. What a scathing opening statement that he's making to these believers. Some among you think you're spiritual because you're doing these outward things, but you're not spiritual. You're not. Which calls for us to do what? For the people who are listening to this message being read in their church, it calls for them to examine what? Themselves. Got to examine their hearts. And then he's going to go from there, and what he's going to do is he's going to tell them what is real spirituality. Now, let me add this. The words that he used up to this point is the idea that this self-delusion isn't just once in a while. It has become their habit. It is their week after week after week. This is how they're going about their walk with the Lord. They're saying that as long as I have the right haircut, I got the right clothing, therefore I'm right with God. And nothing is changing. They are just becoming more and more legalist. They're becoming more and more distant from the Lord. And it's becoming their lifestyle. That's tragic. That's tragic. So what James does is James is pointing out to us very simply God's definition, God's standard of what is real godliness, or should we put it this way? God's standard of what pleases me isn't always the same as what people think. The idea that Jesus put out, where Jesus said, there's people that draw near to me with their mouth, they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. They do worship me in vain. They worship me teaching the commandments of men. How did Micah talk about this back in his Old Testament message that he preached to the Jews? In a different setting, but it was that same idea. He wrote and he says, hear what the Lord says. The Lord has an indictment against his people. He's going to contend with you. O my people, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? Answer me, for I brought you out of the land of Egypt. I redeemed you from the house of slavery. I sent before you Moses and Aaron. And he says, and Miriam to lead you. With what shall I come before the Lord, therefore, and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with religious duties of sacrifice and offerings and tithes? And should I bring the fatted calf and slaughter him? Will that make me spiritual? And Micah says, you can have all the religious system you want, but what does God desire? He says, the Lord will he be pleased with thousands of rams and rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn even for my transgression? And you know the answer to all this is what? No, because you can have church. You can have activity, but that doesn't make you spiritual. What does he tell them back in this passage? God has told you, O man, what is right. What does the Lord require but us to do justly? In other words, be ethical with one another, to love one another. He says, and to walk humbly before your God. He takes it right back. It is more. What's more important than action? It's the heart. It's the heart. And he's driving just, Micah did, Jesus did, James is saying, you've got to go back to the heart. And so what he does in the next few phrases, he says, I want to go to the heart. And I want to show you what needs to be in your heart in order to be right with God. And I want you to catch a phrase that he says that it's just kind of glossed over here. And he says, pure religion and undefiled before God the Father. By the way, in the original language, the and isn't there. It's just God the Father. It's all one. And so he's making it very clear, before God, this is what you need to be. This is what you need to focus on. And he's going to tell them, this is true godliness. If I can break it down and put it in phrases that make a little bit of sense here, it is this. He's going to talk about self-control, control of your speech. Now, let me explain it, and then let me draw some thoughts here, because it's very important we connect all the dots. What he says here, he says, if you cannot control your tongue, he says, basically your religion is totally empty. It's useless. It's not going to get you to your goal, that if you cannot bridle your tongue, you're deceiving your heart, and your religion is worthless. It's impotent. And so the idea here is I'm going to focus on your speech. And I want you to examine your speech. Why would he go after our speech? Because we could say all the spiritual things. People do that. They will say, Lord, Lord, have we not? And they're not right with him. Why does he bring up speech? Jesus pointed it out. Out of the heart is what we speak. And so what Jesus had pointed out of the abundance of the heart is what you say. Not all the time. Not necessarily, but when you're really challenged, when you're really in your comfort zone, not when you're trying to impress people, when you're alone, when you're just with your family, what comes out of your mouth? That really shows the real you. When you're really stressed, when all of a sudden you're ready to get really angry, what comes out shows what's in your heart. Because your speech reveals more than just words that we are careful. It reveals attitude. It reveals ambition. It reveals affection or lack of affection for others. So what he does is James, and you know this, James talks a lot about the tongue. In fact, he has a whole chapter on the tongue. And he even says, if any of you is able to bridle your tongue, you are what type of person? Do you remember in James 3? Yes, no? Do you remember any of this? Okay. Do you remember in James 3 where he says, hey, listen, if any man, let me see if we can catch it. Flip over there and see if you can catch it with me real quick. Oh, man. There it is, back up in verse 2. If any man offend not in word, this man is what type of person? He's a perfect man. That doesn't mean sinless. It just means the idea you're a very mature person. And then he goes on, he says, hey, it's so hard. It's so hard to control the tongue. He says, verse 5, the tongue is a little member, but it boasts great things. Behold how great a matter it does. And he says in verse 8, the tongue can know. Are you following me in verse 8? No man can what? It can't tame. You can't do it. It's impossible. But through Christ, you're able to get control of your tongue. And that's going to show your walk with the Lord. If you're sensitive about that, if you're going to be concerned about not being inconsistent. And so he talks a lot about the speech, and he says basically, you are a really mature person. You are reaching the goals if you're able to come to the point that your speech is all of a sudden that which is pleasing to God, because it's revealing that your heart is getting to where you really want to be sensitive to the Lord. So you're careful about your speech when you're alone. You're careful about your speech when it's just the two of you. And what you say about others, that shows, that says whether you are really compassionate or loving. When you walk out of these doors, it's one thing to sing praises to God and to worship the God and, oh, praise Jesus, and then walk out the door and complain. That shows what's really in your heart. A negative attitude, a positive attitude, a trust, a compassion. And so he's taking on this idea that if you can control your tongue, you have the ability through Christ to control a whole lot more in your life. And so in this passage, he goes on, he says, that word control that I threw up here for, where he says, if any man bridles not his tongue, it shows up. And again, James uses words that are not used in the rest of the New Testament. This is one of those words, and it has the idea to bridle. Immediately, what do you think? A horse. How would you define a horse? Weak, strong? Pretty strong. Can it get away from you? Oh, yeah. And so he's using that idea that your tongue is compared to the horse and such, and therefore it's a tough thing to control. And you all know this is true. You all know you've had the experience where you said things you wish you could take back, never say again. You understand that. We understand what James is talking about. But the idea he uses, if any man is unable to bridle his tongue, that isn't meaning just at church, though that's the way some people would take it. He says, this is the way you are most of the week. This is the way you are Monday. This is the way you are Wednesday. This is not only when you're in a group, this is you. That you as a whole throughout the week, you are showing self-control over your speech, which is a reflection of your heart and your attitude, your affections or lack thereof towards other people. And so we can look and we can read about how the psalmist knew this. Lord, please set a gate and a watch before my lips. Let me see if we can make it real applicable. Okay? If we say, okay, somebody, they lie a lot when they get in trouble. Why are they lying? What's behind the lie? Pride? Pride? I don't want to be held accountable. I don't want to get in trouble. And so they lie. It's not just they say a lie. There's something deeper there that causes this. They don't want to be answerable, or they don't want to have issues. Why do people cuss? Why do they curse? I know in my life before I got saved, the reason I would do it is when something didn't go my way. My response was to cuss or to curse. Or if I'd hit my hand working on the car and it hurt, then I could cuss. It's not just the words, but what is it showing? I had no control over my temper. I had no control over the circumstances and I wanted it my way, blankety, blankety, blank. We could go on and we could talk about this idea of gossip. Gossip isn't just saying something, it's revealing that you lack something in your life towards that other person. What is it? What? Love and kindness and mercy, that you're ripping on them. We could talk about the dirty stories, when opportunities, the angry, harsh words, when somebody cuts you off and all of a sudden you vent. You don't have control over your temper, over your emotions. The cutting down of others could be big pride. The false reports, the same thing. Speaking evil and disrespectful of other people. Again, it's just, I'm much smarter. I'm much better than them. Boasting. I want people to notice me. I want people to understand how wise I am and how good I am compared to other people. The arguing. The idea that I have got to be right. And I can't give in to somebody else. I can't do the Philippians, prefer others before yourselves. It's an attitude. It's a struggle that's in the heart. We could carry it to the idea of opinions when you're not even asked. We could talk about the idea of being loud and boisterous and complaining and being critical. That this is showing not just, words only, it's showing something deeper. So he goes to what the Bible says reveals your heart more than anything else. It's going to be your speech. And you need to get control of your speech. And he says, your speech reveals a lot about you. Does your speech reveal arrogancy or humility? Does your speech reveal a positive attitude or a negative attitude? Does your speech reveal to others that you are a thankful person or you're a critical person? And so he's challenging in that area, and you and I have to stop and say, what would Jesus say about the way I talk? What does that reveal about me? I say I'm spiritual and I look good and I sound good before you. But when I'm alone in private, when I'm in the car, when I'm talking to Deb at home, and none of you hear these conversations, how do I talk then? Is there a consistency? Is there a spirituality involved with it? How do you talk to your kids when you're frustrated? When you're pushed to the corner? That reveals a lot about you. Your attitude, again, your ambitions, your affections, your self-control. So he deals with that one, and then he goes into another area. He says you need to examine yourself. The second area that he deals with is being charitable, serving other people. He makes the statement here where he says, and again I need to get back to the right chapter, he says, pure and undefiled religion before God is this. And what is his statement? We don't want to, this one we want to ignore. But he says, here's what real godliness is. To do what? To visit the who? The fatherless and the widows. If we're living back in those days, what do we think about the fatherless and widows? As a whole, as society, what do we think about them? Yeah, they're outcasts. They aren't getting our attention. They aren't people that we want to invest in. They aren't people who are important, who will benefit us and who will be able to help us out. They basically are needy people that if I get involved in it, I feel I'm going to be drugged down. And that ancient society, that was their attitude. Does it play into society today? We don't want to go and visit people in a rest home because it's not fun. It's not pleasant. We don't want somebody who lost a parent, whether it be by divorce, whether it be by death. We don't want to take time because we don't know what to say to them. It takes time and energy just to listen. And we're just too busy. But we love. And we're charitable. And we're kind because we show up and we smile at each other. And he says, now wait a minute. It's fine to be loving and we're supposed to receive one another. I'm not making that to be bad. But what about during the week going out of your way to the unlovely people. And the words that he uses here, the word visit, isn't the idea of sitting down and just saying, hey, hi, I came and just hi. It is the idea that a doctor would visit to meet a need. It is more involved than just a greeting. It is the idea of to invest energy and time in somebody to meet their need. And so in this text, he's talking about it being a practice, not just a rarity, not just a once in a blue moon. It's the idea of this is you. This is you. You are overly concerned about other people, even the people who are the most needy in society. You have a burden for them. You have a heart for them. And if any man, this is all of you included in this text, he says this is something every one of us can do. And he says this is the idea of not paying some preacher or somebody else to do your visiting this way. Does that make sense? It isn't you and I investing in some clergy and saying, now you make all these visits proxy. It is the idea of you getting involved in reaching out to spend time with people who are hurting, people who are in need, the orphans, the widows. And again, specifically them, or is he just using this as an illustration of needy people in general? I think the answer is yes. But he's talking to a group of people and he's saying, do you remember in the Old Testament, God has a special heartbeat for these people in particular. Therefore, if you are like God, you will love the unlovely, the overlooked, the ones who cannot profit you. And so he's coming down again, not just, okay, if I go to the rest home, now I'm spiritual. No, he's using it as an illustration of an attitude and a lifestyle of loving and investing and putting energy into helping out and doing ministry that nobody else will know about, that nobody else will see, but you're investing in somebody who needs time, who needs encouragement. And so he's talking about that, and he says, do it in their affliction, which could be physical, which could be emotional, which could be because of the persecutions. I don't know what the affliction is limited to, but they have a need, and you're going to meet it. You're going to go and visit those people who are really lonely. You're going to go and do a meal. You're going to do a shut-in visit. You're going to do something to help them out. And friends, it's not easy. You're busy. You got families. This isn't something easy to do because we're not sure what to say to people who have lost a loved one. It's hard. It's difficult. It's not a fun type of visit, but it's a necessary visit. And for the deacons in our church, they're supposed to be doing this. But I got to tell you, it's easier for them to come to a business meeting and handle finances than it is to go and see the widows. But it's what God wants us to be doing, not just the deacons and the pastors, but us, if anyone. Take it to the last idea here, that he says, okay, what are we supposed to be doing? He talks about chastity, purity. He talks about separation. Notice how he does it in this last phrase, where he says, here is pure and undefiled religion before the Father, to visit the widows in their affliction and the orphans, and to keep yourself unspotted from the world. Interesting, the words that he used, it is free of vices, free of stains. It is the idea that you are unblemished. And the word that he uses for keep yourself is you are a guard, and you are like a military guard. You are stationed there, and nobody's going to cross the line. You are going to protect Fort Knox. You're going to protect whatever the base is. You are going to make sure there is nobody infiltrating into this realm militarily. That's your heart. You're not going to let the world infiltrate your life, your thoughts, your actions, your lifestyle. And by the way, did you catch here? The burden on keeping purity is on you. It's on the individual. Now, should we help one another? Yes. But the burden is on you. You putting safeguards. You protecting your kids in their purity from what's on the internet. You having the standards in your home to protect. It's not Hollywood's job to make sure they don't produce something that isn't corrupt. It is your job to protect your family. You've got to make the standards. You've got to make the calls. You've got to set up the parameters to guard yourself, because it all comes down to this. You want to, and again, it's just because we have we have internet protection, therefore I'm God. That's not the point. The point he's making is, be ye holy as. So you have an attitude that I want to have a spirit that is controlled by God. In my speech, I'll show that. I have a compassion that is like God's, how I treat the most unlovely. I have this idea of I want purity in my life. That is a godlike purity and to please him. And so he's dealing with far bigger things, being unspotted from the world. You know it's not the physical world. You know it's the antithesis of everything that is godly. It's the society as a whole that gives all these goofy things and tears down standards. And he's writing to them, and later on he says, friendship with the world is enmity with God. We believers can get caught up in being worldly. And he's saying you got to watch yourself. Now, does that mean we isolate and have no contact with anybody who is sinful? That can't be what he's doing. Why not? Because we're sinful. Okay? Did Jesus isolate from sinners? No. But was he pure? Yes. So the Lord himself, he was a friend of sinners, but he didn't participate. So what he's doing is bringing back to this idea, we're to be distinct. We're to be different. Even if people think we're weird, we're supposed to be God's people that are living holy in an unholy world. We are to be the light in darkness. We are to be the salt in that which is already polluted. We're to be different. And so you have to come down to say, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? You're supposed to be doing what James calls, and not only James, but John wrote about it, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. We have that same idea where in Romans, I beseech you, present your bodies a living sacrifice. And he says, holy, acceptable, which is your reasonable worship of the Lord. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. Be different. Be different. You know, there's a tree that's in South America and Central America more than any, that this seed is taken up by birds when they get into this plant, and it's a gummy substance, and when they go to the trees, they try to get some of the gummy off of their beaks, and they drop this seed, and usually against the tree, and then it starts getting root, and the roots come down the tree, go into the ground, and they start growing and expanding, and they eventually kill the tree, which brings its name, tree killer. That is the world for believers. It's very subtle, but it strangles us. It saps the life out of us. It takes the nutrients of spirituality away from us. And so what he's telling us is live a pure, unspotted life, a holy life. And you got to ask yourself, am I doing this when it comes to dating and marriage? Am I doing this when I go to work? Am I doing this in my interactions with other people? What about my entertainment, my dress standards? What about the way I handle money? Am I being holy and righteous in that area? Come on in, kids. Am I doing that in the area of how I joke and how I converse? Am in my standards of conduct, is there holiness before the Lord? And so he's wrapping up and he's saying, this is what you need to examine. Don't just think about what do I present to others. What does God see? Does he see within your heart that there is a controlled speech? Does he see that there's this idea of compassion for others? Does God see that there is a holiness, a chastity in your life, a purity of holiness unto the Lord? He says that's what real godliness is about. It's not just keeping rules and regulations. And you and I can do this because I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. How did Peter put it? To them that have obtained the faith through the righteousness of Jesus, Grace and peace be multiplied to you, as his divine power has given to us all things that pertain to life and godliness. You know what the bottom line is? Because of what Jesus did here that we're celebrating this evening, you can live a really, truly godly life before the Lord. Question is, are you? Don't worry about the rules and regulations. Worry about a relationship that is unhindered before Jesus Christ.